The new school year began for local colleges and universities with fears of an uptick in coronavirus infections. So far, the results have been encouraging, with positive test results mostly coming in below statewide average. One notable exception is Boston College, where the number of infections has drawn attention from officials in 3 neighboring communities. One of them is our guest, the District City Councilor for Allston-Brighton, Liz Breadon. Thank you very much for being with us again, Councilor.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for the invite.
Councilor, I know at BC, the results right now, if you put them in one perspective, they look a lot worse than other colleges and universities. If you see them from another, they don't look so bad. How do you see them?
One of our big concerns when Boston College announced their reopening plans was the plan for the off-campus students. Most of the colleges have a pretty robust plan for on-campus students, but the off-campus situation is slightly different. It's less regulated, and we had concerns about student gatherings and compliance with other public health recommendations like wearing masks. So in a way, it was dismaying to hear of the outbreak at BC, but it wasn't unexpected.
Well, of course, we're not just talking about crisis response. We're talking about what normally happens. There are colleges, I think, where students are tested, all of them, on a weekly basis at least. What about BC?
I think BC have a randomized program of testing. They're not routinely testing every student. Other colleges are testing their students, all of their students, multiple times per week, but that's not happening at BC.
What difference does that make, you think?
I think it's an early warning. If you're screening all of your students every week, I think you have a better chance of identifying a positive case and then nipping it in the bud before you have an exponential growth in cases across your campus.
Well, I want to go back to things that were known even before the beginning of the school year, and I guess one is the level of activity in athletic programs at BC. And I guess even before that, going back to July when the council was trying to get people from the colleges and universities to talk about their plans publicly, what did you see going back to that point?
Well, back in July, we held a hearing, a public health committee hearing on the returning plans for students to return to campus. Unfortunately, BC didn't participate in that conversation at that time. We talked to Northeastern and Harvard and BU at that time. The plans, the robustness of the plan really is uncovered when you actually bring the students back on campus and see what happens. We know that Northeastern had students who were congregating in one of their off-campus facilities at the Westin Hotel, and they were dealt with pretty severely. I think when you have students living off campus, which was always a concern in our neighborhood, students living off campus, you have so much less control over their behavior and what they do.
Well, I still remember what it was like to be an undergrad and to be mentally in a different world from what surrounded me. But what about the interface between BC and Allston-Brighton? I mean, are there places or points where these two worlds really do come into contact?
Well, BC ordinarily has about 1,200 students who live off campus in the neighborhood. Some of them, most of them live in Brighton. And they share, they use public transit, they go to the supermarket, they shop in our neighborhood shops. So there's a sense that BC and any student group on a college campus, they don't live in a bubble. They interact on a daily basis with their neighbors, and that has been a big concern for our residents in Allston-Brighton.
Well, speaking of the interface between institutions and the rest of the neighborhood, there's another kind of frontier along Western Avenue, mainly between Harvard University, which is expanding, and Allston and getting into Brighton as well. There's going to be some rezoning about future development along that corridor. What would you like to see?
The plans to rezone are framed in the context of the cost of land and the development costs. So there's a lot of pressure to build a lot of density in that area, and there's going to be there seems to be a consideration of building commercial or research facilities along that stretch. So it will be a dramatic change from what we have now, where we have sort of single-story commercial and industrial businesses along that corridor. My biggest concern is if we add a lot of density, that we also need to ensure that we have a very robust investment in mass transit and transportation, so that we don't just add a lot of congestion to that corridor. And we need to make sure that this public transit and bicycle lanes and pedestrian facilities to make it a very multimodal corridor for moving around.
Now, of course, one of the problems with public transportation is that it's widely expected there will be a new rail hub, which is really, as you said, multimodal. But there's a question about how soon that will be built. Are you worried about a time lag between the new development and the new transportation?
The West Station project is part of the conversation around the I-90, the Mass Pike realignment as we come in at the Allston exit. I think it's really important that we establish the West Station sooner rather than later in the process of that project, so that we can build a north-south connection to Cambridge and over to the Longwood Medical Area, but also and integrated with an east-west connection. So that would mean that commuters could leave their car at home and come in on a rail link and get off at West Station and then get it over to Cambridge, to Kendall Square, or over to the Longwood Medical Area without using a car. And that would be very beneficial to commuters folks who live in the neighborhood. We would have less congestion and less pollution, but also folks who may be coming in from the western suburbs, would be easier for them to get to work without using a car.
Well, officials are still on this long road to consensus about rebuilding the interchange for the Mass Turnpike in Allston. Mayor Walsh has made it clear he does not want to see a brand new viaduct because it would be too much of a barrier between the neighborhood and the river. State officials have been sort of leaning of late maybe toward having a smaller, more streamlined kind of viaduct. Do you think that's something that people in the neighborhood could live with?
A viaduct of any size is still a barrier to in the neighborhood. Like Allston has been separated from the river for the duration of that viaduct being there since the 1960s. So we're really pushing for an at-grade solution, and there are a few different options on an at-grade solution. The other thing to consider is that in the 21st century, we should be looking to 21st century transportation solutions and not thinking about what we would have liked in the 1950s and 60s, when the car was a much more preferred option for moving around.
Speaking of other concerns in Allston, you have eating and drinking places that we don't want too many people to go to right now, but we want to make sure they're still available in the future. What about making that happen?
We're very concerned about the status of our small businesses, the restaurants and bars in the neighborhood. They've been through a very difficult time. So we're really working we're going to have a council hearing sponsored by myself and Councilor Bach in the near future to discuss how we might support those businesses and ensure their survival going forward through the winter and post-COVID, to have a robust recovery going forward.
Well, there are other things in the business mix as well, and I guess there are some ideas for helping them survive, maybe something about street closing, some holiday fairs. Do you think those are doable?
I think we have to really bring in all of our creativity and think outside the box of solutions that might work. The idea of a winter market type scenarios, outdoor eating, just to think more of a Northern European way of thinking about winter activities. You put your coats on and you put your warm boots on, and you take it out and mingle. It being cold and dark doesn't preclude them from having a social life. So I think we have to maybe learn from other parts of the world about how to engage in social activities outdoors in the winter time. I think the challenge is with regard to COVID is that going indoors and being in a more dense gathering, it increases the likelihood of infection and transmission. So we have to look at all the options and be creative, I think.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
That was Liz Breadon, the District City Councilor from Allston-Brighton. We'll have more news in just a moment.